Let's be honest. We all think we have a pretty good sense of what we're good at, right? But what if I told you that our own self-assessment is, well, often fundamentally flawed? Today, we're diving into this fascinating paradox of self-perception and why we might be the absolute worst judges of our own abilities. You've seen it. I know you have. The singer at karaoke who's completely tone-deaf but belts it out like they're a superstar. The coworker who confidently pitches an idea that is just objectively terrible. It makes you scratch your head and wonder, how can some people be so completely, so painfully unaware of how bad they are at something? Now here's the kicker. Our first instinct is to just call it arrogance, right? But what's really going on is often not a character flaw at all. The answer is actually baked into the very wiring of our brains. It's a cognitive bias, and it affects all of us in some pretty predictable ways.
To really get a handle on this, we've got to start at the beginning of the journey. That moment when someone is just starting out, when they're standing on what we could call the peak of overconfidence.
This whole phenomenon actually has a name you might have heard of, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. At its core, it's a cognitive bias where people with very little skill or knowledge in a particular area tend to be wildly optimistic about how good they are. It's a total miscalculation of the self.
So how in the world does this work? Let's pull back the curtain and look at the mechanics behind this really bizarre but very human feature of our psychology. The psychologists who first described this, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, they pinpointed the problem. They called it a double burden. And it's this two-part problem that basically traps unskilled people in a little bubble of blissful ignorance. Okay, so here's how this double burden breaks down. First, pretty obvious, a person's lack of knowledge causes them to make a ton of mistakes. But second, and this is the absolute key, that exact same lack of knowledge makes it impossible for them to even see their own mistakes. Think about it. The skills you need to perform well at a task are the very same skills you need to be able to judge performance in that task. Let's make this real. Imagine two people learning Spanish. You have the beginner. He learns, a handful of words and he's totally amazed by himself, but he doesn't know enough to spot his own awful grammar and pronunciation. So he wildly overestimates how good he is. Then you have the skilled learner. She can form whole sentences, but she's kind of disappointed. Why? Because she knows enough to see the giant mountain of grammar and vocabulary she still has to climb. She actually underestimates her own skill.
But hold on, it's not just beginners who get this stuff wrong. Let's flip the script and look at the other end of the spectrum, because it turns out experts have their own blind spots too.
Yup, the Dunning-Kruger effect also helps explain how high performers and experts misjudge their own abilities, just in the complete opposite direction.
For the experts, the problem is something totally different. They fall into a trap of assuming that because a task feels easy to them, it must be easy for everyone else. They're not overestimating their own skill, they're overestimating everybody else's, and that leads them to totally underestimate just how rare and special their own ability really is.
Now, all of this leads to a very famous saying about knowledge, one you've probably heard a million times. But what if that bit of common wisdom isn't quite as true as we all think it is?
We've all heard this, right? It sounds so profound. The idea that the smarter you get, the more you see the vast, endless ocean of your own ignorance. It feels true, and we usually attribute it to history's greatest minds.
So let's just ask the question. Is it actually true? Does the data back this up? Do experts really feel more ignorant than novices do?
Well, a really fascinating study from 2017 decided to test this. They looked at experts and novices in a bunch of fields: physics, biology, history. And what they found directly challenges this old saying.
The results were, they were pretty surprising. When they asked people to rate their own personal knowledge, the experts actually rated their knowledge almost 10 percentage points higher than the novices did. So contrary to the saying, the more they knew, the more they felt they knew.
And check this out. It wasn't just about their personal knowledge. The experts also saw their entire field of study as being much bigger, containing way more information overall than the novices did. So more expertise didn't actually lead to this greater sense of personal ignorance. So we have a puzzle here, right? The unskilled are overconfident because they have no clue what they don't know. But the experts, they seem pretty confident too. So what gives? What's the real difference between that blind confidence and genuine wisdom? For that answer, we need to take a trip back in time to ancient Greece.
Yep, we're going to bring in one of the founding fathers of Western philosophy, Socrates, because he wrestled with this exact same problem of knowledge versus ignorance.
So the story goes that the legendary oracle of Delphi declared that no one in Athens was wiser than Socrates. And this just baffled him, because Socrates was totally convinced he knew absolutely nothing. So he went around questioning all the so-called wise men and realized, oh, the oracle was right. His wisdom wasn't in having all the answers. It was in being acutely aware that he didn't.
And this right here brings us to the crucial difference, the two kinds of ignorance. The person stuck in the Dunning-Kruger effect thinks they know, but they don't. They are completely unaware of their ignorance. The wise person, the Socratic ideal, knows they do not know. They are profoundly aware of their own ignorance. So the defining trait of wisdom isn't knowing things, it's knowing what you don't know.
And this quote from Socrates, recorded by Plato, just sums it all up perfectly. What I do not know, I do not think I know either. That's the goal. That is the ultimate antidote to the Dunning-Kruger effect.
So, in the end, that's the real takeaway. True expertise, real wisdom, isn't just about cramming your head full of facts. It's about developing an honest, clear, and accurate map of your own ignorance and being totally okay with how vast that math really is.
And that leaves all of us with a final challenge. We all have these blind spots, these unknown unknowns. The true test of wisdom isn't about having all the answers, but about constantly searching for the questions you haven't even thought to ask yet. So I'll leave you with this. What are yours?